Did you know that power in a true democracy is supposed to have boundaries? Boundaries defined not by personalities or politics, but by law. Yet in Nigeria, power often behaves like water. It flows where it wants and floods even the spaces the Constitution clearly marks out of bound. I have been reflecting on the Rivers State crisis since the ban was lifted. And one of the things I realized is that it is not just another chapter in our long history of political drama. It is a mirror reflecting what happens when the line between federal authority and state autonomy blur beyond recognition. Here's the civic truth. Every time power stretches beyond constitutional limit, citizens lose something. Not just rights, but the meaning of governance itself. Because once those boundaries collapse, every state becomes vulnerable. It is no longer about Rivers State. It becomes a national crisis. The declaration of emergency measures in Rivers State, triggered by local government tension and political rivalry, was framed as a step to maintain law and order. But beneath that legal languages lies an older, more dangerous pattern. The habit of Nigerian federation to confuse protection with control. Every political crisis in Nigeria eventually exposes the same truth. Power in this country has no natural brakes. The moment you think it's limited, it finds a new loophole, a new degree, a new directive from above. When the federal arm steps into a state under the pretext of saving it from itself, we must ask a question. Who defines what emergency is and who benefits from it? Because emergencies in this country have a pattern of becoming excuses. It's not the first time, really. In Nigeria's political history, emergency has often meant intervention, and intervention often meant interference. And let's be clear, Rivers State is not just a state, it is a symbol. It is the oil capital of Nigeria, the economic pulse of the federation, and one of the few states whose internal politics have national consequences. So when its instability is threatened, the federal government does not just observe, it intervenes. But here is the danger. Intervention, no matter how justified, can quietly mutate into dominance. And this is what scares me the most. A precedent has been set to enable an extension of abuse of federal power. Federalism in its purest form is built on a simple civic principle: shared power, separate competence. The federal government handles the big picture: defense, foreign affairs, currency. The state handles the local issues, which includes education, health, community governance. Together, they form a partnership defined by mutual respect. But in Nigeria, that partnership has always been uneasy. Our federalism was not born from negotiation. It was imposed by necessity. And this is one of the problems. And like all imposed structure, it wobbles whenever politics shift. The Rivers crisis reminds us of that wobble, that very dangerous wobble. When the local government system in Rivers State collapsed into factional control, it exposed a loophole in our constitution, one that allows federal executive to interpret its own power broadly. This is extremely dangerous. When the federal government decides who runs a local council in a state, when state assemblies operate under siege, that is not federalism. That is feudalism. The slow, silent transformation of democratic federation into a network of power lords and sublords. And when that happens, the constitution goes silent. The silence of the constitution is not literal. It is moral. It is the silence that comes when citizens stop believing that rules matter, when institutions exist but do not function independently, when justice depends on who calls the shot in Abuja rather than what the law says in our supreme document. I'm not sure how well you've thought about what happened in Rivers State, but I can tell you, in its essence, it's not about a governor or local government chairman. It is about the survival of boundaries in our democracy. And that is why I'm upset that Nigerians did not put any kind of resistance. Because once those boundaries collapse, every state becomes vulnerable and every governor becomes a tenant in their own government house. It is no longer about Rivers State. It becomes a national crisis. Think of it this way. If President Tinubu can suspend an elected House of Assembly in Rivers State, an elected governor, and get away with it, what stops him or any other president from dictating who shares a local government in Kano State, Enugu State, or Osun State, for instance? Federalism without boundaries is just centralized power, period. The 1999 Constitution may be flawed, but its federal character was meant to protect diversity, political, culture, and economic. But that protection only works when both sides respect it. Federal overreach weakens not just the state, but the federation itself. Every political crisis in Nigeria eventually exposes the same truth. Power in this country has no natural breaks. It always finds a new loophole, a new degree, a new directive from above. The Rivers episode is just one reminder of civic illness we've refused to treat. The habit of personalizing power in a system that was designed to institutionalize it. The Constitution gives every arm of government defined responsibilities, not to compete but to complement. Yet, in practice, the Nigerian federalism often looks like a pyramid, not a partnership. At the top sits the presidency, vast in reach, almost imperial in culture. Below it, the state struggles for air, trapped between financial dependence and political loyalty. And at the base of it is the local government, the closest tier to the people, yet not more than footnotes in the grand script. Let's start there. Local government autonomy in Nigeria is a myth. Every government that comes in promises local government autonomy. The 1999 Constitution says local government should function independently, yet in practice, they are attached to the state governors through joint accounts, manipulated elections, and political patronage. So when the Rivers crisis broke out, when elected local government chairmen clashed with state government over tenure and control, it was not just a local dispute. It was a reflection of deeper contradiction, a federal system that centralizes power at every level. Federalism in name, feudalism in practice. Because in truth, our political design is not built on equality between levels of government. It is built on dependency. The state depends on Abuja for monthly allocation. Local government depends on state for release of fund. Power trickles downward, but not by law, but by permission. Political permission. And when power depends on permission, autonomy becomes an illusion. This is why Rivers crisis matter, and I don't think it was talked about enough. It is not about one governor asserting control. It's about a system that rewards control. It's about how institutions have learned to prioritize loyalty over legality. But let's look at the other side of it, the federal center. When Abuja steps in under banner of stability, it rarely acts as a neutral arbiter. It acts as a political player. This is why having strong institutions is even more important than having strong leaders. Nigeria's civic vocabulary needs an update. We often talk about corruption, bad governance, and political instability, but we rarely talk about constitutional culture. That is the foundation of everything else we do. If the constitution is treated as optional, then every institution becomes negotiable. A healthy federation depends on two civic habits: restraints and respect. But our political class treats institutions like accessories, things to wear when it's convenient and discard when it's obstructive. Courts are obeyed when they affirm, but ignored when they restrain. Civil society is welcomed when they are silent, vilified when they are vocal. This is not governance. It is domination dressed up as democracy. And here is where civic education becomes essential. Citizens cannot defend boundaries they don't understand. Many Nigerians do not know that Constitution limits not just citizens, but leaders. That power itself has rules. That federal might is not supposed to be a weapon. It is supposed to be a balance. So what can we do? First, we must reframe federalism as a citizen issue, not a politician issue. It is not about who controls the oil revenue or who appoints the judges. It's about who controls your right to participate meaningfully in governance. When federal structures are weakened, civic participation shrinks. When local governments are captured, community voices disappear. When state power are eroded, the essence of federation is lost. Second, institutional check must be revived through civic pressure. Reforms cannot be left to politicians alone. Civil society must press for independent fiscal commissions, public accountability dashboards, and transparency in state and local allocations. Every tier of government must be forced to publish how funds are used, not as an act of goodwill, but as a legal obligation. Third, citizens must learn to see federalism not as a luxury of elite, but as a living defense of their daily rights. Federalism is not about structure, it's about survival. It's about ensuring that no one person or office, no matter how powerful, can hold the entire country hostage to their ambition. Because when you strip away all the legal jargons, federalism is just another name for freedom. Freedom for the people. And when that freedom is captured, the constitution goes silent. Not because it lacks words, but because it no longer commands obedience. The Nigerian constitution says we are a federation. 36 states, one nation, multiple layers of authority, but in practice, we are often closer to feudalism with federal branding. And when power becomes personal, local governance suffer. Let's break it down. In theory, each level of governance has autonomy. The federal for defense and monetary policy, the state for education and infrastructure, and local government for grassroots development. But in reality, the boundaries blur whenever power is in context. The Rivers situation where local government chairmen were locked out, the governor and the state assembly banned, and military intervened on the order of the president in a democracy, tells us things are deeper than they are. The Nigerian federalism remains fragile because our institutions depend on personalities and not principles. And here is where it becomes even more than a political squabble. It becomes a civic question. Because when power becomes a tug of war, citizens always lose. Now think about it. Every time we normalize federal overreach, we set precedent where the federal government decides what's legal or necessary. That's how democracy slides into authoritarianism, not through coups, but through constant exceptions that becomes new norms. Now we're talking about federal compassion in form of posthumous pardon for the Ogoni 9. The government says it's symbolic justice, a reconciliation gesture for Ken Salowiwa and others executed under military regime. But the truth is that you can't forgive someone for a crime they never actually committed. You can only vindicate him morally by addressing the same system that silenced him. So, Ken Saro-Wiwa wasn't just fighting for environmental justice. He was fighting against the machinery of unaccountable power. So when a democracy issues a pardon for a man who died confronting that same arrogance, it's worth asking, is this genuine restitution or just political theater? That's the thread connecting it all. Power without repentance, authority without accountability. Nigeria doesn't just lack a constitution, it lacks constitutional culture. Federalism isn't a word on paper, it's a discipline. It's the idea that power is safest when it is shared, not hoarded. But our leaders treat federalism like a buffet. They pick what suits their appetite and leave what demands restraint. And that's where the civic movement comes in. If citizens don't understand how their federation works, they can't defend it. When people say, this is politics, not our business, that's how constitution becomes silent. Not because it was suspended, but because citizens stop speaking its language. Federalism is not just about geography, it's about trust. The center must trust the state enough to let them govern. And the people must trust the laws enough to defend it when leaders don't. But trust is earned through consistency. You can't promise reform by silencing dissent everywhere. You can't pardon Ogoni 9 and still ignore environmental accountability in the Niger Delta. You can't preach federalism while practicing control. If there is any hope for our democracy, it lies in rediscovering the balance between power and purpose. Not through another amendment even, but through civic pressure that forces leaders to govern with conscience. Because at the end of the day, the constitution cannot defend itself. Only the people can. There comes a point when every democracy must look in the mirror, not to admire its reflection, but to confront its contradictions. For Nigeria, the moment is now. Because the River State saga, the Ogoni 9 pardon, the constant dance between freedom and control, they all expose one truth. We are a nation governed by power, not principles. And until that changes, every crisis will look different but feel the same. The tragedy of weak federalism is that it reduces governance to a chessboard of egos, while citizens live in the ruins of political gains. But this is where civic conscience must evolve. You can't just react to crises anymore. You must decode them. You must see beyond headlines to the deeper structural betrayals they represent. Stay engaged, stay organized, stay focused. This is Civic Room with Menkiti, and I'll see you in the next episode.